My name is Renée. They told me that I have to write this diary, but I don't feel like it. It's not true that I feel better when I write. Actually, it's worse. I was a shy girl, and I just wanted to be like the others. But that's not what happened. No. I did things that, when I think about them now, eventually brought me here. Everything started with that damned light. It happened for the first time when I was still a little girl. I was 6 or 7. I was walking outside school when suddenly the noise started to melt into an indistinct rumble. The light increased out of all proportion and everything lost its meaning. I could no longer recognize anything. Objects, people, words, not even myself. I felt fear as a physical sensation. It prevented me from moving, from swallowing, from breathing. After God knows how long, everything went back to normal. But a new fear replaced the old one. Different but terrible. Of the light coming back. And it did come back. My memory of those years is hazy. Between the age of about 7 and 10, my memories are disconnected, and I couldn't say how many times and how frequently the light used to come. My mother gave me a doll around that time. Charlotte. Thinking back to it makes me want to laugh. But at the beginning, I remembered that I was afraid of her. I thought she wanted to harm me, to kill me and take my place. But when the light came, she would stay beside me, and her presence did not disturb me. I was able to talk to her, and so she became my best friend. At least until I was in grade 2, when everything changed. She didn't laugh at me, and if I had to say something to my mother, I asked her to say it. When things inside me turned bad, she was the only one I could turn to. Now all of this makes me blush, but Charlotte was a real friend to me. I knew that she was just a doll. I wasn't stupid, but at the same time, she was real, too. I don't know how to explain it. It's difficult. My mother would cuddle her and tell her things. I guess she was trying to communicate with me, but back then I was too afraid to understand it. I didn't tell anyone about the light. I knew that something terrible was happening to me. I thought that I would die, and the shame I felt was so deep that an uncontrollable restlessness took over me. I was afraid when other people were nearby. I saw fingers pointed at me, mouths laughing, condemning me. I tried to be alone. I would sit down on the ground and, curled up in the dark, I would repeat a word, any word, in continuation. This helped me not to think, not to lose myself. I would spend entire days like this, hoping that my mother would ignore me. Her compassionate words hurt me and terrorized me even more, and so I had to. Shout and shout and shout those words. After a few days, things got better, and little by little I came out of my hiding place. But the fear was always there, under the surface, ready to strike me even harder. I remember a recurring dream from that time. I used to have plenty of nightmares, But this particular one was so real that even today, I ask myself whether it could have possibly been just a dream. I was in bed, enveloped by the warmth of the blanket, in the dark, about to succumb to sleep, when I heard the bedroom door open. I turned to face the wall and did not have the courage to turn around. I only saw a shadow cast against the wall by the light filtering in through the door. Then I heard the door close again, and I thought that it might have been my mother who, before going to bed, used to peep in to see whether I was sleeping. However, there was no time to breathe a sigh of relief, for footsteps approached the bed, and I heard the sound of breathing close by. Fear paralyzed me from head to toe. The blankets were pulled back. I remember the chill of fresh air on my spine. Someone sat on the bed, and I trembled. Then the dream finished. The light often came when I was at school, turning my fellow pupils into puppets that would terrorize me. To me they appeared transformed, with the bloodied heads of animals stuck where their own heads should have been. I would curl up on the floor and would even wet myself. The teacher would try to console me and would smile at me, but her teeth and her eyes would terrify me even more. Things did change. I don't know why, perhaps during the 2nd or 3rd year of school. It was more or less in the same period that I became friends with Bruna. I remember the sensation of joy I experienced when I felt almost normal. The light isn't coming. The dreams have gone, and I have a real friend, one who speaks to me. I would repeat this to myself proudly while looking in the mirror, where I no longer saw an embarrassing reflection. It seemed to me that the world was a difficult place, but it was no longer impossible. Bruna. I did not understand what Bruna saw in me, especially as she was almost 2 years older than me. I would tell her this every now and then, and she would joke about it, saying, "Nothing. I don't see anything in you, which is what I like about you." And then she would hug me. But one day, she was sad and pensive, and said to me, "You and I are the same. Don't be fooled. You are reserved and honest, and I'm not. But that's the only difference between us. The only one." Then she began to cry. I was struck by the perception in her words, but only today, after re-examining my past, do I understand what she meant. I no longer considered my body as something disgusting and ill. Far from it. I began to look at myself, to caress myself, and smell my own skin. I began to explore and experiment, finding physical pleasure. My ideas were not very clear, and I never spoke to anyone about these things. Bruna, however, spoke about them. She boasted about her love stories and her young men. To my eyes, she was very lucky, always being wooed by marvelous, generous, and kind boys. Thus, I fantasized about her adventures, pretending that I was the main protagonist. But how could I ever be like her? Occasionally I recall that she had black and blue marks on her body, but I was so naive that I did not understand. I did not put 2 and 2 together. It was Don Gino who explained things to me a few years later. He told me about Bruna's father and brother, but I was already very ill. The light had returned, and that thing made me suffer even more. It was my world, and it was crumbling. When I spoke to Bruna about it, she turned her head away and was silent for a long time. Prince Charming doesn't exist, Renée. At least not for us. I was 14 years old. I didn't think it was possible for a boy to look at me and desire me. When he asked me if I wanted to go for a walk, I didn't say anything. I didn't even have the courage to look at him. Things improved for a number of years, then suddenly everything came crashing down. One evening I came home drunk, and the following morning a terrible crisis overcame me all of a sudden. What had I done? I was terrified. I thought I'd lost my sight. The light burned my eyes from inside. The memories of the previous day emerged in bursts, images, flashes, which unleashed something monstrous inside me. Repetition of words was no longer sufficient. Now there was a voice in my head which repeated them louder than I did, and they were words of accusation and blame. So I covered my ears and shouted and hit my head against the wall and threw up. I remember the doctor, the wall filthy with blood and vomit. My mother wasn't looking at me. Bruna was crying but trying to hide it. Charlotte was beside me. I never told anyone what had happened. He came to visit me, but I refused to see him. I became agitated. I think he liked me, even though things turned out badly. In that period, I began to suffer from memory loss. The few things I learned didn't please me at all. He told me that I was looking for him. It was all my fault. Bruna told me that sometimes I got drunk. People in the village gossiped about me. Sometimes I was covered in black and blue marks. I didn't realize what was happening to me, what I was doing. I was no longer in control of my life. From my little corner. He felt accused, hurt. I chased him away. I insulted him. He was proud, handsome. He said things about me to other people, which he shouldn't have said. Mother caught me coming home drunk. She beat me and sent me to speak to Don Gino every day. He came back and tried to speak to me. I think he liked me. Sometimes I sent him packing and I started shouting at him, but other times I embraced him. I held him tight and loved him. But he couldn't bind himself to me. I was 16 and ill. I had no future. I didn't get out of bed for weeks. Then I did things I was ashamed of. I slept with men. The guilt tore at my soul, and the light came back to torture me. I invented stories to justify my actions. I couldn't bear my own weight. Mom found out about it. Her voice split my head. I pushed her away because I was afraid of dying, and I shouted to the whole world what was happening to me, and that I didn't understand. The police arrived, and they carted me away. I remember the onlookers shaking their heads. They would be better off without me, cleansed of shame, with something to talk about for a while.